within communication, there's always two levels. There's the content, which is, the delivery, which would be like, that was racist or something like that. But then there's the process, like the meta of how things are talked about. And it's a really great distraction when you don't like what somebody is saying, you don't like the content, to jump up to the process and say, I don't like how you said that.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Karina Belizzi.
Hello and welcome to another interview episode of Care More, Be Better. Today we're going to dive into the weird and wonderful world of TikTok and politics, as I'm joined by a friend from that platform. And you know what? On TikTok, we refer to ourselves as mutuals. Karen, whose handle on the platform is at KCLMFT for anyone wanting to find her, is a women's rights activist who has a background as a licensed marriage and family therapist with over a decade of experience. She became involved in politics when Donald Trump came on the scene, and she recognized his danger. Karen started making content online when she began receiving emails from his campaign revealing the dog whistles, the race baiting, and the all-out calls to violence for all eyes to see. Because she's been so critical of Trump, speaking out against his misogynistic behavior, his stoking of racism, and his division, and also his connection to Project 2025, she's under fire from Trump's MAGA crew. For that reason, we won't be revealing her full name nor linking to her business. That said, I very much encourage you to follow her at KCLMFT on TikTok. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's so good to see you live as opposed to just regarding your TikTok and, commenting back and forth or messaging each other. I have to say, I've been really impressed with how quickly you've been able to grow your following on TikTok. And I know it's always kind of strange to step into the limelight in this way. So I wanted to ask you as we got started, what really inspired you to share all of these campaign MAGA emails on TikTok?
I have recognized Trump as a very dangerous man for, ever since probably even before 2016, when he was doing the Miss Universe and the pageantry stuff, I could recognize how dangerous he was, particularly to women. There was some point that I started getting his emails, and that originally started, I know he got my email because I signed up for a seat at his rally a couple of years ago. Just a bunch of us in my hometown did that. So there would be empty seats. We thought that was really funny and kind of a little rebellious thing to do. So we did that. And so I know that's how I got my email account. But just within the last couple of months, I've been receiving emails from the Trump campaign, like 6 to 8 a day. And what I've known about his popularity is from Fox News. And I was like, wow, Fox News is really bad. It's really dangerous. Like, it pales in comparison to the things that are in these emails. And sometimes I make fun of them and there's some snarkiness and some silliness, but the truth of it for me is thinking about his followers. And I know there's a lot of boomers, and I'm thinking there's loneliness. There can be, a lot of them see themselves in him. There's a lot of people who just really relate to him. And being at the receiving end of these emails, like I said, 6 to 7 times a day, not to include all of the stuff that's being put out on his Truth Social, not to include the emails or the text messages that they might be sending out, not to include whatever mailings are being sent out. It really frightened me.
So it was new. It wasn't, you've been on the email list for 2 years, because I remember when this trend erupted, people saying, oh, I'm going to sign up for a seat and I won't show up. I did the same thing. There was one in Santa Clara near me and I was like, oh, ha, 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 ha. Maybe I'll sign up for 5. I have 5 different emails. Let's make it fun, right? But I quickly unsubscribed from each of those addresses because, I found them even then to be pretty offensive. So it kind of was as if over the course of the last few months, at least from your experience, like they ratcheted up the level of hate and the level of extremism. Is that what I'm hearing?
I wasn't receiving them until just a couple days ago. So I'm guessing that that's where they got my email from, which was a couple of years ago. But this was new to me that they were landing in my email box. Maybe somebody signed me up for them as a joke or something. I mean, it's kind of my best guess.
That's always possible.
Yeah, but it was there was something, I can't remember, there was something that happened. And then after that, I started receiving them. And I was thinking that I didn't know that he was sending emails out at that rate before then, but it was new to me.
So why don't you give us an example of a recent one that you found to be particularly concerning and perhaps created a TikTok about?
Oh my goodness, there's so many, so many to choose from. So with Vice President Harris now being the likely Democratic nominee, his racism and his misogyny has come out full force. There was one that I received, I think probably about 2 weeks now. And one of the comments was, swamp creatures are coming out of something in support of, he called her Kamala, something crooked Kamala or dangerously liberal Kamala. And I was like, huh, he's talked about draining the swamp. He's talked about the swamp before. I've never heard him use the term swamp creatures. Isn't that silly? And some of my commenters were kind enough to say, that's not accidental. Like, that is not the fact that he's using this term for the very first time now that there is an African American woman, on the ticket. It's not accidental. And what it was referring to is that when white people owned slaves, for example, in Florida, they would use Black babies and toddlers as alligator bait. They would put them on a collar and put, like the version of a fishing line or whatever, put them out in the swamp. This is so hard to even talk about. The baby's cries would attract the alligator. The alligator would come and have a meal, and then they would reel in the alligator. And those were the babies of the enslaved people. And I get just full body goosebumps every time I think about it. Yeah. So that was the worst that I cried for 2 days. I could not comprehend. And the comments section for that video, there were so many people like, well, yeah, everybody knows this. People were saying, oh, my grandmother told me stories about this. This is part of our history. A couple of people were just confounded, like, did you really not know this, Garrett? And I was like, I had never heard of anything close to that.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that this brings up for me because I was witness to this on your page, and I remember specifically that post and the comments. I had heard the term before, and I had heard the term come up when people were critical of his language around draining the swamp in Washington, D.C. But that is perhaps also because of the community I'm connected to. And so, it just came up in conversation. And at that time, it was the first I'd heard that particular story. But at the same time, I've also had people in my midst be critical of women, and in particular white women or white men, just shedding a bunch of tears and doing nothing. And this has been, I think, a common thread that the community of people of color have experienced. And even your name, Karen, calling you out as a Karen or being cruel about it or just being mean in certain capacities, not without reason, but because the Black community in particular has felt very much like we haven't had their back for a long ass time. And that, our words are just words. They're simply that. But when it comes down to brass tacks, we're going to vote in our best interests, which includes continuing the patriarchy. Oh, okay, I can't even say the word. I get so angry. like we are somehow, and perhaps I'm defensive on that front, but, defending the patriarchy and keeping them down. And in particular, I take issue with this because I've fought my whole life for people of color in my midst. And I literally mean my whole life. And, I think that it's different for somebody who doesn't come from privilege and who also was very close with communities of color growing up. So you identify with them in a different way. It's not like you feel as much like you're a white person over here. It's like they're part of your life. And I don't even like saying they're because it feels like we're together. Like I have issue with that. I grew up on a hippie commune. Our community was very different. I attended powwows forever. Tribeswomen made me moccasins. Like these are my formative experiences. But I also experienced things like going to elementary school for the first time, having not been in elementary school before, and not having been exposed to other white people much before. And having, about six, So up until that point, not really being in common white community. And now I was in Lumbertown, USA, essentially, in Southern Oregon with a bunch of white folk. And the people I gravitated to build friendships with were, they were Mexican heritage or Native American because they seemed more like me in a way. And I know from the outside it didn't look that way, but they felt like home. And so I remember distinctly a girl coming up to me at one point and saying, why are you friends with them when you could be friends with us? And, so I experienced this whole like white supremacy from a very different perspective than most white kids do, right? And I eschewed it. I didn't like it. I felt really disgusting and icky, And so I'm the person in the room when I hear someone slander another culture, even in jest or a joke, that points it out and brings it up. It perhaps becomes unpopular in that moment. I'm comfortable being criticized. And today I chose to wear a red, white, and blue like shirt because I can be a patriot and I can be critical. And that's okay too, right? I do think we have a system of white supremacy, and we have to dismantle that to make progress. We have revealed over the last 9+ years this dark underbelly of America, and I'm going to call it that. It's the darkness of us. It is this thought process that, one person can be better than another is essentially at the root, I think, of capitalism too. So it's like, we're stuck in this. Trump is the epitome of all of that. And I find it incredibly disheartening that people like Candace Owens, who's a Black female, speaks out so negatively against her entire community, really, of Black people. They aren't really her community, but she is a shill essentially for the other side that would, make jokes about swamp creatures. And I'm having a difficult time with that even today. I still have a difficult time with that. I have to block certain people on social because I don't need to see this every day. Like I don't need that darkness to come into my life. So I guess I want to bridge from that personal experience and talk about how at that moment you came to some realizations about what we disguise from our American culture, even with language, even using something like that. And also how it suddenly drew people to you, because like I saw this almost immediately. The comment section kind of bursted with people that were in support of your personal education, but also of the experience of what it would be like to come to this revelation now. And that has resulted in you going from something like, I don't know, you were at about 1,000 or so followers, something similar to me. And then all of a sudden you're at 25,000 like in a matter of days. So, what came next at this point?
For me, deep humility, I think. After I made that post, I went on to make a couple other posts, just basically saying, I'm educated. I'm a therapist. I have clients of all, colors and sizes and shapes. I've known intellectually that racism exists, right? I get it. I thought I got it. Hearing the stories like directly from the mouths or the keyboards of people that have been so damaged, just like it dropped down into my heart for me. And I understood it in a completely different way. And I've been really humble. I've been trying to be really humble about, first of all, not making it the responsibility of anybody else to educate me. Like, that's totally on myself. But also being very open to, like, please send me resources, give me books to read, help me learn. And there's been a lot of white women who have said, hey, take us with you. Let's do this journey together, which has been really overwhelming and lovely for me to see. So I just think it became a very felt sense, and it's something that I feel very passionate about. My core value is that every human being on earth has the equal and intrinsic value. Like, when you are born, your welcome to earth gift basket is equal value. And that's what I fight for when I talk about patriarchy to include misogyny and racism and even nativism, where only people that belong to this country belong to this country are allowed in this country. We devalue people that are different. I study neuroscience as part of my ongoing education, and I've learned that there's this really deeply kind of in the back of your brain, the more primitive mammalian part of the brain, there's a protective, I guess, circuitry that under threat, people differentiate in-group from out-group. So in-group can be anything you choose it to be. And with racism, in-group is people that are the same color as me. And remembering this is when you're feeling threatened, right? So this part of the brain says that in-group, this is us, we fight together. Out-group, completely dehumanized. They're not even human. They're objects. There's absolutely no value to them at all. And I think that's how racism happens. That's how genocide happens. That's how misogyny happens. That's how all of this hate happens. And I don't think hate's the only piece of it. I also think there's selfishness. Who wants to give up privilege? And privilege feels pretty good, So yeah, I don't remember exactly what the question was. I kind of trailed around there, but
no, I think you got there.
I really want, I would love if I could build a community of white women and Black women together talking and sharing, and again, I never want it to feel like, Black women, it's your responsibility to teach us, right? Because it's not their job. It's our job.
I think the first book that you gravitated to or that you shared on TikTok was actually called White Women. And I wrote this down because I also just finished the book on audiobook. White Women, Everything You Already Know About Your Own Racism and How to Do Better by Regina Jackson and Sarah Rao. Sorry, I think it's Syra Rao. What inspired you to kick that off specifically to start with that book?
It was just the one that was recommended the most. I mean, I have a list literally this long, and there was the two that were recommended the most were that book and one called The Bluest Eye. So just basically off of that. And I think
Toni Morrison, I think. The Bluest Eyes.
What's that?
Isn't that a Toni Morrison book, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it's in my list. Sometimes I feel like I'm more of a book collector than a book reader, but yeah, I've read the first couple chapters of White Women, and I think it's a really great kind of intro to people who really don't have an understanding of their own privilege. But I also would imagine for someone who doesn't have an understanding of their own privilege, it would feel a bit confrontational.
Well, I did listen to the audiobook, so I heard them read their story directly. Regina and Syra actually read the whole thing. And I found personally that I thought that the people that would benefit from this work the most would never touch it. And so it really is those that are on the fence or awakening in a way to their own privilege and their own racism, understanding that their reactions, even, clutching your purse a little tighter as you walk by a Black boy, something like that, that these are moments that produce a negative impact in the people around you. Like they can't help but notice that you did that too, right? Like you realize that was communication. So much communication is nonverbal. And I really think we do need to talk about these things. We need to shine a light on the dark places and get people to admit when they are, really just being performative. Like one of the things that Regina and Syra are actually critical of is how some white women in particular will be performatively in support of people of color, but then behind the scenes, be taking credit for the work of team members who are of color, or making assumptions that I need some extra support for this catering setup. I'm going to ask the Latin American employee that's on my roster, and not even understand that they're doing that. So really just kind of shining the light, moving into self-awareness, and then understanding that your spot has to be, if you're really going to be a part of the change, to be an anti-racist, which means speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. And that's something that I think culturally we're uncomfortable with, because we are taught that propriety is a thing. This is one of the masking pieces of a patriarchal society. It's like, oh, well, that's just not proper. That's not how a real lady acts, right? The guy spreading his legs on an airplane, moving into your personal space, and you just sit there daintily and never say a word, right? Just make yourself smaller. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. And we get so angered by it, but yet do nothing. And I think that's their point. That's the big point of this book. But they really have done so in a somewhat confrontational way, which makes it, I think, challenging for even the people that are on the fence to really hear the message when they might even be ready. And I think that this point that they communicate through the book, and I know you may not have finished it, so you're only a couple of chapters in, but they make the point routinely that it's like, it's not okay to be an angry Black woman or an angry person of color, right? So when they come forward and their tone is perhaps not pleasant, and they're pointing out something that was unjust, right? Or something that happened to them that they had an experience about, and they're not speaking about it all softly and meekly, right? That is criticized. And that in itself, even criticizing, well, you sure could have been nicer in your delivery, is in itself racist. And I'm not sure I agree, but I also feel like the message of the book is that I'm not allowed to say that I don't agree because of the positioning.
I think delivery matters. Nobody's going to hear a message if you receive it in a defensive way.
And I think sometimes people do need to hear it in a really direct fashion and then come back to it later. But I question whether, I think we need to get to a space where it is okay to talk about your personal feelings and to say, I didn't think that was right, even if you have disagreement, and then talk through it, right? I think we're getting to a space where it's almost like culturally we've forgotten how to have discussions. We've really forgotten how to argue. We're just trolling each other. And so I want to get out of the trolling of each other. And I want to see us move into something where it can be more of a collaboration. And so my feeling is that as a group of activists, we should be locking arms together and marching forward with strength and being willing to say the uncomfortable thing and speak truth to power and still be unifying. Another thing I fully agreed like with this book, and I'm really curious to see once you get there, they talk about the fact that women in our culture are so cruel to each other. And I mean, this is just something I have seen time and again. And I don't think I'm guilty of it. I may have been at some point in my life, but in general, I feel like I'm always trying to connect with the underdog and not be part of the gossip circle. Like I'd rather go and talk to the person and form my own opinions about something that happened rather than, oh, that person is now out and we're just going to shun them and be the catty, popular mean girl, that there's a trope about for a reason. Right? Yeah. At any rate, those are just my thoughts on just finishing it yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing you talked about, and I think a lot of, and I'll say white woman because, that's kind of who we're talking about. But within communication, there's always two levels. There's the content, which is, the delivery, which would be like, that was racist or something like that. But then there's the process, like the meta of how things are talked about. And it's a really great distraction when you don't like what somebody is saying, you don't like the content, to jump up to the process and say, I don't like how you said that. So it's a great distraction from, somebody confronting
In that case,
you.
it's a way to not take accountability for your action.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so I get it. I get the point. I get the reason that they would say, like, you just aren't allowed to tell people they can't be angry, and I get that.
Yeah.
I also think that you have to keep the door open. And part of the way you keep the door open is by being willing to converse through it and not get quite so confrontational.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's, like I said, I see that a lot in therapy. When people are talking about something, it so quickly moves from what they're talking about to how they're talking to each other. Right. Where somebody's like, hey, you forgot to do the dishes last night. And then it's not like, oh, yeah, sorry about that. It's, well, why are you always harping on me? Or, why are you yelling at me or something like that? And I think it's something similar that in the book that they're describing that, when white women get confronted with something, we're like, oh, you're an angry Black woman. That's the only reason you're saying that. And that's the part that we just, yeah. And that just it needs to stop. It's a defensive tactic. And, it's like, too bad, like if you don't like the way that I'm saying it, it's not my job to repackage it in this beautiful little sentence so that you can take it. So yeah, the conversations are hard. I've had some commenters say liberal white women are like the worst people ever. And the comments that I receive, some of the cruelest comments that I receive are from who look like, you can never tell on TikTok who's who, but seem to be from other white women, which does surprise me. But like you said, if we could linking, I love the visual of like linking arms and like, let's work together.
Well, and I think, this is where also in the book, they're critical of things like, oh, white women love to do things like organize a women's march, right? Like, I mean, I had to laugh, right? I actually know one of the people involved in our chapter here who was like president of them. I'm like, oh yeah, on the nose a little bit here, like it's a march, but get them to go ahead and come out and speak up in the moment by themselves as opposed to among an army of people is something different altogether. And it takes a different kind of strength and a different kind of fortitude and a different kind of commitment. It also comes with its own fear because how am I going to be penalized for speaking up or speaking out? Am I just going to be seen now as the angry woman who is, oh God, she's such a ball buster. She really is this, she really is that. Like we are held to a completely different set of standards than our male counterparts. And so there's risk that comes with action from a social perspective that does hold a lot of people back. And I mean, I know people in my circle that I just held back. I know that I've been called the dragon lady and the ball buster, and I hear about them after the fact, the tropes about me because I wasn't willing to be silent. And, they could say things like, she's a force of nature, or they could call me a bitch. That's really it.
I've had a lot of my even family members tell me that I've just lost my sense of humor. I'm too serious now, or I'm too sensitive now about things. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you're making jokes about people, that's not funny. Any kind of people. It's not funny. So.
Yeah, I mean, some things in jest, like, okay, I've been watching the Olympics and there's the specific French pole vaulter who has all sorts of jokes circulating now about French men that are pole
Yep.
vaulters, and it's like, oh, he just, and some of those are borderline on race because they're talking about French men and things like that. But, it's in jest and it's obviously just such a comical occurrence in general. I saw that for those who haven't seen this French gentleman pole vaulter, he made it over the jump, but then his Johnson kept him from completing without pulling the pole down. So his pole interfered the pole. It was hilarious. I think we've all seen it dozens of times, right? And I read that he actually just received one of the largest porn contract offers if he chooses to take it because of this, right? So, and this is just a moment sidetrack from an uncomfortable discussion, but
Not an endorsement you would want, though, right there.
well, he'd definitely say goodbye to any future Olympic prospects because that's against their clauses around what's proper in the Olympics, which we could also have an entirely different discussion on because they'll let people with sexual assault threats up against them compete. So the world we live in, right? So I know that for you, this platform is one that provides you the ability to shine a light on some of those uncomfortable stories and that you're opening yourself to learn more and more about how race relations occur in the United States and that you are willing to stand up as an anti-racist. I wanted to step back for a moment to my college education as an undergrad in anthropology when I took African American studies courses. And this is something, I took quite a few African American studies courses. And one in particular, my first one was probably the most controversial. I was in a set of, probably 25 students. It was a relatively small class. And our professor said, in her opening lecture that racism in America exists on a spectrum. And that everyone, not every white person or every Black person, but everyone in our culture exists on a spectrum of self-loathing or self-hate to racism. And there are these two extremes. And if you're white, you're inherently on the racism spectrum. And if you're Black or person of color, that you're inherently on the self-loathing spectrum. And that this is what allows us to perpetuate racism in this culture. And it's part of what allows us to prop up the patriarchy. It's part of what allows us to, just kind of accept that this is normal. And by accepting that this is normal, that we are all essentially complicit because it's the programming that we receive in our society. And I remember the class was made up of people of a variety of different races, some of whom were from mixed families, white mom, Black dad, Asian mom, white dad, somebody from Laos, someone else from Trinidad. Really from all over the globe. And in a small class, I was one of 3 white women. And I think there was 1 white guy in the class. And then everybody else was of some other mix, right? And people were pissed off, like really pissed off to hear this presented to them because all of the white people, myself included, were like, I am not a racist. You cannot call me a racist. This is calling me a racist. Getting defensive. And the children of mixed race families were saying things like, well, then how do you explain me? I come from this. Like, what does that mean? And everybody was really raw. And I feel like that's the same story that's being told in this book, White Women, that we need to get over that hump. And it can be uncomfortable to hear it the first time, especially. I remember the professor going, I understand. And she's backing away. I understand. This is hard to hear, and she's backing up. And, she was probably 60 years old, Black woman from Oakland, California, born and raised there, lived in NorCal her whole life. And she's teaching a course at a college in Cupertino. Through the course of that, I think it was roughly 10 weeks course, we kind of went over a hump together. And part of that was accepting that even those of us who considered ourselves to be anti-racist, like me, who stood up to power, who were willing to have the uncomfortable conversations, that didn't stay quiet, that stood up for really the underdog. I've always gone to stand up for the underdog. That my racism shows up in a different way. I'm sometimes even overly kind to a person of color. And I see that because, I might have been like not being particularly nice or whatever because I was having a rough moment, and then suddenly like try to leap into something that, oh, okay, well, I have to show my best foot and be my best self and make this person feel appreciated. That this is how it shows up for me. And that's not to say that that action is wrong, but it's to say like I'm somehow trying to make up for something that exists in our culture. And that I'm acting differently because I'm trying to make up for something that I see occur every day. When the person just like backs up a little bit when somebody is walking through, or, looks a little longer than they should. And so we got over that together to land at this space where there's more self-acceptance and understanding that race and culture are very complicated issues, that they will probably take us another 100 years to solve some of that, and that some of these challenges may never completely go away because there's something about humanity, and this is part of my anthropological research, where we have this tendency, like you said earlier, to go to that reptilian brain and protect and preserve what we consider to be our little pod or our group or our family, whatever that is, however we define it. Sometimes it gets as small as literally your children and your partner, and that's it, right? This is like the story that might be told from McCormick's The Road, right? Like if you watched that film or if you read that book, where society has crumbled so quickly and so completely that you can't trust anyone but yours. And I think the fact of today is that we will get closer to that if we aren't really careful and we don't make big change happen fast. So one of the purposes of my life with this podcast is shining light, social impact, sustainability, and regeneration. Those are the three kind of topics I champion. You can't create a sustainable future without addressing some of these social issues. We can't continually rise certain people up and keep other people down by the color of their skin or their economic prospects. We're operating in a caste system here in the United States, and we have been since our inception, and we've been hiding that. So caste can be, your background, your family, your money, but it can also be your race. It's what you're born to, essentially. And while we have this American dream, in order to keep it alive, we need to put people like Kamala Harris in the White House because she's an example of what the country was supposed to be. And so many of our so-called patriots, the nationalists, have been working hard to try and keep that truth from coming to the surface again. So those are my closing words, and I know we're close to yours. So I wanted, as we prepare to wrap today's shows, to offer you the floor to say a few words. If there was a question I hadn't asked that you wish I had, you could ask or answer it. And if not, just share some closing thoughts.
The most important thing that I have learned is that Indigenous cultures throughout the world, philosophy and religion across time, and now neuroscience all know that human connection, kindness, and love is what matters. If you want the longest life, the healthiest life, and the life with the greatest satisfaction, your personal satisfaction, you can't isolate yourself. You have to connect to others, other people, other animals, the earth. We are all connected, every single one of us, to every blade of grass, even. And I love that neuroscience is now proving what people have known since the beginning of time about the connectiveness. And so when we separate ourselves from people, We separate ourselves in group, out group, or anything, any way that we separate ourselves, we're harming ourselves, and we're harming the connection of the earth, and we're harming everything. There are something called the 3 pillars of meditation, and there are 6 or 7 physiological changes that happen within the body if you practice these 3 pillars of meditation on a regular basis. I'm not sure exactly how long you have to do it for, but focused attention. So spend a couple minutes focusing on something. You can literally look around the room that you're in right now and notice something that you haven't noticed before, and just observe it and put your awareness on that. The second one is open awareness. So focused attention, open awareness, just being open to what you are receiving within your heart, within your head, within your gut. Spend a few minutes just being open. And then the third pillar of this meditative practice is kind intention. And yes, there is scientific proof that kind intention helps yourself and it helps the world. So that is what I am most passionate about in my life, is kindness, love, and connection.
Well, I'm so happy to be connected to you now. And I have to say that those closing words so nicely connect to my earlier content on Blue Mind, where I feature Dr. Wallace J. Nichols' work, which, deeply rooted in neuroscience, talks about the importance of water and how it connects us all. Like, water's in those plants you talked about and in the people, and brings our mind to a happier moment when we're having a difficult moment. I think we all kind of know that intrinsically. So thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate you and the work that you're continuing to do. And I look forward to a long mutual friendship.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to chat with you. And I hope everybody has a really good day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, talking about race is something that's really difficult. Talking about culture as it relates to race, these systems of challenge, is also very hard. I'm thankful for Karen's friendship and for her willingness to speak out on these things, both on TikTok and on this podcast. So to find out more about her, I encourage you to visit her TikTok page and follow her. And her handle would simply be found by going to tiktok.com/the @KCLMFT. I will, of course, share her link with my show notes and in the expanded blog page on circleb.co. You'll find on that page our complete transcripts and links to resources that can support your journey, including that book, White Women. I encourage you to read it and try to keep an open mind. I know that some moments of it are a bit rough, but if we can move into that discomfort, if we can be comfortable getting uncomfortable and grow with it, great. You can still be critical. You can think, okay, I'll take part of this and not the other. That's okay too. But this is a growth opportunity. Now, while you once found all of these resources on the website caremorebebetter.com, we have transitioned our platform to circleb.co, which is also a cause before commerce shopping site. I offer, environmentally friendly products, things that seek to help you eliminate plastics from your home, from the clothing you wear to the textiles you buy. So I encourage you to visit the site. When you sign up for our newsletter, which is connected to this podcast, I will plant a tree on your behalf. Our goal is to plant 10,000 trees this year, and we are on our way. So just visit circleb.co, join the email list, we'll plant a tree, make the world a little greener. And if you happen to shop on the site, we will also donate 1% of our sales to charities for the planet. Now, I want to just say this simply. I really want to thank each of you for coming on this journey today. Uncomfortable conversations are at the root of change. By being part of this, you are inviting your world to care a little bit more so we can create that better world together. It's my goal and my honor and my tribute into the moment to be a part of this and to put this into the world. It's my belief that together we can find a way to dismantle racism, end the patriarchy, and build a future that considers the rights of all people equally. Thank you for joining me today, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.